Let's start with the solution and then talk about the problem. People say they're against censorship. In fact, what they're against is unfairness and thus unfair censorship. Here on YouTube, if nobody is allowed to show nudity, if nobody is allowed to show nipples, it's a very simple rule across the board. It can be consistent, transparent, and fair, and we all know there are other websites that do allow you and do encourage you to show female nudity, to show nipples, so on and so forth. The problem is not censorship as such. The problem is unfairness, inconsistency, and lack of transparency. There's a YouTube channel based in New York City, now has a huge number of viewers, called Sneeko. He had nude images of a conventionally attractive blonde female on his channel, and they were edited in from a movie he was talking about. So this wasn't like nudity that happened accidentally or spontaneously during a live stream. Okay, this was intentionally placed in nudity, and this wasn't nudity in the context of a medical lecture about how to perform surgery properly. There have been exceptions like that in the past, legitimate medical use exceptions for nudity or something. No, his channel was not punished in any way. I didn't check today, but just a couple of weeks ago when I saw that, I was really shocked by it. The particular video hasn't been taken down. His channel hasn't been demonetized, deleted, or punished. Okay. My channel has been punished repeatedly, even just within the last 2 months. Not even for nudity, but for discussions or imagery that draws attention to a female body part, even if there's no nudity involved. Okay. So to give an example, just a couple days ago, a couple weeks ago, I mentioned Kim Kardashian in passing, and I had the cover of a magazine pop up as an image here on screen. And she's wearing a bikini. She's covering the bikini area more. It's not showing you anything you haven't seen before. It's probably not showing you any part of Kim Kardashian in particular you haven't seen. It just popped up in passing in the back. And that video was punished for drawing attention to female body parts, even if there was no nudity. So you have this tremendous sense of unfairness and inconsistency, and you sit there and wonder, why is it that this other YouTuber, Sneeko, has intentionally erotic nudity of a conventionally good-looking actress clipped from a movie? It's a movie he's discussing. He can get away with that, right? I can't get away with. Not even a question of getting away with. I don't see anything wrong whatsoever. I can't get away with discussions of my sex life with no illustrations. I can't get away with showing the cover of a magazine for like 4 seconds in passing when it's appropriate to the conversation. It's reminding you of who or what it is I'm talking about. Okay, this is the problem with YouTube. I mean, you'd think nudity is something so simple that if you have a censorship policy against nudity, you don't have to define what nudity means, but you do. And if you have a policy against racism, you have to define what racism means. Right? We're having this discussion today because somewhat buried under the avalanche of recent news is the fact that YouTube deleted a huge number of massively popular YouTubers who were indeed, in my opinion, racist. I would not dispute for a moment that Stefan Molyneux was racist. I would even say he was a self-aware, intentional racist. He was cognitively racist. And again, we have this one word racism that covers many different things. I think someone who is intentionally deploying racist arguments in pursuit of a political objective is very different from, say, someone who loses his temper while playing a video game and shouts something racist at the screen. That's not good. I don't encourage it. I don't make excuses for that. There was another case a million years ago of a guy and his girlfriend broke up with him and got together with a black guy, and he lost his temper and said some bad things about black people or that particular black person. It's bad, it's regrettable, it's wrong, but that's not the same thing as people consciously and intentionally deploying racist arguments for a political purpose, as Stefan Molyneux did for years. But still, the problem is not censorship. The problem is transparency, consistency, and fairness. Stefan Molyneux's channel was deleted, but not Faith Goldy. Faith Goldy is a racist, and she is a racist political leader. You can see still now on YouTube conversations she's had in which she is engaging in explicitly white supremacist discourse, explicitly anti-Semitic conspiracy theory discourse. Faith Goldy has also stood for election. Then we take a step back and we have to ask the question, is it in the public interest to allow someone like Stefan Molyneux to articulate his message precisely so that other people can debate it, can refute it, so that that discourse and that debate can happen? And let me just ask, if not on YouTube, then where? All right. I wish YouTube had competition, but this is quite different from, say, debating nudity on Instagram. Instagram doesn't allow people to show their nipples or various parts of their body. There's a lot of stuff that's about 85% nude on Instagram, but they don't allow 100% nudity. Try Google. There are plenty of websites with photographs of naked women, naked men. No, the world is no poorer because Instagram doesn't allow this kind of nudity. Although I utterly despise Stefan Molyneux as an individual, you have to recognize there have been some brilliant criticisms of him on YouTube. There have been some brilliant refutations of him. I have seen some brilliant videos breaking down piece by piece and discussing precisely the ways in which he is racist and the ways in which he is manipulating his audience into accepting his particular doctrine of so-called race realism. Okay? Now, is that worth something? And further, if that can't happen here on YouTube, then where is it going to happen? Right? So I think it's important to focus on the solution more than the problem here. I have said in the past that what we need is not one YouTube, but 2, 3, 4, many competitors to YouTube. So I'm not going to repeat that argument again. It's tremendously important that we have other companies with other standards of censorship that will allow and encourage, even if it's just the level of gore that you see on a news report on CNN or the BBC. We can't even engage in discussion of the war in Afghanistan or something here. We can't show news footage anymore. We can't have the level of sexual discussion that's on HBO. We can neither have Fox News nor refuting Fox News here on YouTube. The standards of censorship have become so narrow that to say they have a chilling effect on freedom of speech is an understatement. So yes, one part of the solution is going to be the pluralization of the video platform itself. I've discussed that in the past. But another solution that is really much less work for the corporation hosting these videos or hosting whatever content it is on your platform, anywhere on the internet. Another solution is just to eliminate anonymity. Okay? Now, Stefan Molyneux is not anonymous. He uses his real name and his real face. Faith Goldy is not anonymous. She uses her real name and her real face. I think it's very important to observe that by far the worst hate speech, the worst harassment, the worst abuse, the worst encouragement of violence and so on, and the most worthless internet content to debate or respond to or to try to engage people with is always the anonymous content. So as bad as Stefan Molyneux may be, I don't think it's worthless for people to criticize his videos, to engage in a critique and discussion, and even to try to engage his fans in reconsidering and realizing what's wrong with this content. I think that's meaningful. And for anyone who has the patience or sense of moral duty to do so, over the last 10 years, that's been a meaningful chunk of what went on here in YouTube politics, right? So, this is the problem. You can't only have one half of that political discourse. Like, as bad as the racism of Stefan Molyneux may be, keep in mind, we wouldn't have the anti-racist discourse against Stefan Molyneux if we didn't have that there for us to criticize and respond to. So there's some value, even if the value is only in that contrast or in that debate that arises out of his content. However, So what I've just said about Stefan Molyneux and the critique of Stefan Molyneux, I would not say that about the garbage race baiting content. Racist, but I'm saying race baiting in the sense of inciting conflict. The kind of garbage content you see on 4chan, on Reddit, even on Facebook, and especially you see it all the time in Discord. The type of, just of hatred, of pointless, self-defeating, race-baiting conflict that you see in anonymous forums. I think that's something very different from what we had going on here on YouTube on the last 10 years, 15 years, whatever it's been. So there was an alternative for YouTube as a company, and I think there's an alternative for many companies who are investing in the internet now. One of the alternatives is, instead of trying to employ an ever-expanding team of censors to evaluate and calibrate their standards ever more precisely as to what is and isn't racist, or what is and isn't racist enough to get banned or punished, these dotted lines that nobody can make sense of as to why one person is banned and not another. An alternative is just to eliminate anonymity itself. To say, hey, if you want to participate in these discussions, you have to have skin in the game. You have to be willing to put your own face, your own name, and your own professional reputation on the line if you're going to state these racist views, if you're going to engage in these debates. And maybe I'm a reckless optimist, but I think that when people do that, there is the real potential for change. There's the real potential that they can become educated, that they can change their own view of the world, that they could learn from the experience of voicing and sharing their views, hearing back, reconsidering, and then moving on. And that's what we're losing on YouTube right now. You may think that racism is something as easily defined and as easily punished as nudity on this platform. YouTube has had a great deal of trouble defining nudity and punishing people for posting nudity already, as mentioned, right? You may have seen examples in the news, you may know examples from your own life of someone who's accused of being racist. Let's specify a white person who's accused of being racist against black people. And then, in response to these allegations, the white person reveals or draws attention to the fact that they're actually married to a black person and raising black kids, whether those are their own kind of half-black kids or if they have adopted kids or foster kids or something. They reveal that, and they put up a photograph of themselves with their black family at a black church on Sunday, and they say, look, they actually live in the black community, and these allegations aren't true at all. Every so often, there are controversies of that in the news. And of course, you may also have the experience in life. It's quite possible to meet white people who are married to black people who are nevertheless racist. I mean, it may be an interesting aspect of the context to evaluate someone's views. They may nevertheless have racist views while having married into a black family or while being part of the black community. So life's full of those kinds of unexpected contradictions. All right? My first wife is French. My daughter is French and growing up in France. I have had YouTube demonetize and soft censor my videos for being racist against French people. And when you read the details of precisely what YouTube said, it's not just that they're racist against the French, YouTube claims. It's not just that they're biased against the French. The claim is that my video was hate speech against a minority group, meaning the French, that the video constituted hate speech against the French. And what was I criticizing France for? What was I criticizing French culture for in that video? I was criticizing them for their lack of interest in washing their hands, their poor standards of hygiene in restaurants, in grocery stores, in bakeries, and even in hospitals. I talked about a lot of the bad experiences I'd had with French people refusing to wash their hands, lacking any concept of, culturally, the germ theory of disease, of transmitting illness by handling food with unclean hands and then eating it. Okay. Now, there are a couple levels to this here game. What if YouTube is right? What if I really do have some kind of bias against the French? What if I'm racist against the French? What if that video even is hate speech against them? What if YouTube is right isn't there still some value in me being able to come on camera and share with an audience my negative experience of what it was like living in France? Whether that's reasonable or unreasonable. Couldn't that be of some value to the audience? Couldn't that be of some value to me if people get in touch with me and carry on the discourse and carry on the debate and end up educating me or deprogramming me or changing my perspective, where I gain some kind of new perspective on France or the French? Like, something positive could come out of that way. And then again, also, just like Stéphane Molyneux, what if it's significant partly because of the refutation of it? Like, what if my bias against the French is also important and meaningful because it generates this kind of counter discourse, right? YouTube's fundamental problem is, as I've already said, a lack of competition, a lack of any viable alternative. YouTube's recent decision to delete so many major influential racist channels was covered in Forbes magazine. This is real news. This has real consequences. We live in an era when I hope this doesn't last forever. I hope this is a brief moment in the history of the world where the most important platform for publishing, the most important speaker's corner, the agora of our political discourse, the pnyx of our political discourse, of all the important debates in our time. This is where Donald Trump comes to make his political statements. This is where Bernie Sanders comes to make his political statements. Across the whole political spectrum, YouTube is the crucial theater where contrasting political views come to be heard. And the corporation that owns YouTube has decided to narrow and narrow, to tighten and tighten the rules on censorship. And the problem is, again, not that censorship itself is bad or evil or wrong, but that when we accept censorship, when we accept it, it has to be on the basis of consistency, transparency, and fairness. The lack of those three things, the lack of consistency, the lack of transparency, the lack of fairness in how YouTube's censorship policies are applied, make it unacceptable for all of us. I have, within just the last 1 month, I have repeatedly been punished for videos containing so-called hate speech, including, as I mentioned, alleged hate speech against the French. My channel is in danger of being deleted for so-called racism right now because I dared to engage in a productive and healthy critique of the leadership of Black Lives Matter, doing such outrageous things as looking up the looking up the founders of the movement, reading the books and book chapters they'd written, discussing their writing, discussing their political leadership, discussing what's going on in the movement, in what I think is a really healthy and productive way. Not only do I feel strongly that my videos about Black Lives Matter, not only do I feel that my videos are not racist, I think there's a really insidious form of racism in the lack of critique directed towards Black Lives Matter and its leaders. I think there's a profoundly unsettling racism in the fact that nobody else read the books, the articles, and the chapters these people published. Nobody else looked into the intellectual underpinnings of this movement and questioned who are these people, what are their objectives, what are they. But I think one of the greatest problems with Black Lives Matter is what is called the soft bigotry of low expectations. There's been so little critical interest in evaluating who the leaders are, what the pursuit. But we have a lesson right here, right now, unfolding that YouTube will not allow me to engage in that critique, will not allow me to engage in that political discourse. If this is not a chilling effect on freedom of speech, on the most important, most constitutionally protected form of political free speech, what is?